5 years ago, before I started doing this YouTube thing, I lived in London and Brussels, commuting between the two cities every single week. And I definitely saw myself as like a city girl. Today, whenever I go into a city, I just go into like fight or flight. My body goes into this like super stressed out mode and I just can't handle it. I get so overwhelmed. Chances are, if you're watching this video, you probably live in a city because over half of the world's population does. That's 4.2 billion people worldwide who live in cities, which is kind of weird if you think about it, because if you just rewind a couple of thousand years, cities were not the norm, and people who lived in cities were not the norm because most of us lived out in the countryside. So living in a city gives you better access to healthcare and education, potentially better job opportunities, all that good stuff. So if cities are that great, why is it that every time I go to a city, I just feel like a nervous wreck and I can't handle it? Well, scientists are starting to do some research into how living in an urban area affects our mental health and our physical health too. And it turns out that, according to a lot of studies, people who live in urban areas are up to 40% more likely to suffer from mood disorders such as depression, schizophrenia, or anxiety compared to people who live in rural areas.
So we know that we're living at a time of increased stress-related illnesses and diseases. And when we feel stressed, our parasympathetic nervous system is activated. And that's the system where we're kind of in fight or flight. And what happens if we live kind of stressful lives with fewer opportunities to restore and recover, is that kind of turning on of the parasympathetic nervous system can lead to ill health and disease.
9 out of 10 city dwellers are affected by air pollution, which is linked to a number of conditions like heart disease, asthma, other respiratory problems, and yes, depression and anxiety and chronic stress as well.
Diabetes, obesity, all of those sorts of things, they're connected to the way that we live today, which is far from the way that we evolved to live.
A 2019 study compared the effects of living in the city to smoking a pack of cigarettes every day for 29 years. Later on in the video, we'll take a look at some solutions. But for now, in order to understand how we even got here, let's take it back. I mean, all the way back. 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, which is us, were busy minding their own business in the wild. We weren't living in luxury penthouse apartments or doom scrolling on Instagram. For 98% of our existence, we were hunting and gathering, living with nature because, spoiler alert, we are a part of nature. Of course, we shouldn't blame the concrete jungle for all of our problems, but there's a growing movement of experts who are saying that this disconnect with nature that we are experiencing right now, especially those of us who live in the city, that disconnect from nature and how we live, how we eat, how we breathe, how we are, our lifestyles, all of that is making us sicker and unhappier than we ever were before. Heart disease and cancer were virtually unheard of in our good old hunting and gathering days. I mean, most of us died from accidents and homicide, granted, but, you know, back then we only worked half of the 38 hours a week that we work these days. Yes, hunter-gatherers only worked 20 hours a week and spent the rest of the time resting and socializing. In fact, it wasn't until about roughly 10,000 years ago, with the introduction of the agricultural revolution, when Homo sapiens began living in villages. With more humans living together in order to grow and produce food, more houses were needed, more people were needed to build the houses, the need for writing, business, money, laws, and power grew, and over 6,000 years, the world's first urban societies emerged in order to keep this new way of human life afloat. So the funny thing is that back in the days when I considered myself to be a city girl, I never actually realized just how constricted and limited the city made me feel because I never had anything to compare it to. Because back then, I had never really been out in nature for longer than just like maybe a couple of days. And then when I moved out of the city and left my old life behind, the first thing I did was I flew to Nepal and I did the Everest Base Camp trek. It's like a long 2-week hiking adventure. out in the Himalayas, and it's absolutely awesome. It's amazing, but it's also so hard. I found it so challenging to be in such a new environment, out in the mountains where you're uncomfortable and tired and exhausted, but also you're screaming in awe at all the vast beauty that surrounds you. You feel so grounded and connected. I just felt like a different person. I felt like I found something within myself that I just never knew I had, because the city never challenged me in those ways. And I'll never forget that trek, because it truly changed my life for the better. So after my long trek in the Himalayas, whenever I went back into the city, I could see the stark difference between how nature made me feel, being in a forest like this, quite relaxed and at ease and at peace and just having fun, versus how I felt in cities, which was normally quite stressed out and anxious and worried about the next, pedestrian crossing, and just felt stifled by all the concrete and all the pavement. I could see that difference, and I no longer called myself a city girl at that point, but I still felt like I was being weird for reacting to cities in that way, like hypersensitive, because surely if billions of people live in cities all around the world, surely there's nothing wrong with cities, right?
We've never spent this little time outside.
This is Lucy Jones, author of one of the most eye-opening books I've ever read. It's called Losing Eden: Why Our Minds Need the Wild.
One of the eco-psychologists I interviewed said something which has always stayed with me. He was talking about how you create an industrial society. And he said, children spend 12,000 hours in a classroom. And that is what it takes to create our industrial psychology.
And then I read Lucy's book, and I felt so validated in how I felt. I realized that I wasn't alone, and I probably wasn't weird, because there's a growing body of science that suggests that spending all of our time in the city is not really very good for us. Of course, in our modern industrialized society, we like to forget that we are actually just living, breathing animals. Experts estimate that the average city dweller spends between 1% and 5% of all of their time outdoors. That's 95 to 99% of their time spent indoors. In fact, studies show that most kids in the Western world actually spend less time outdoors than prison inmates.
When you see where we've come from, and you see our world today, which is very routine-based, very rule-bound.
Belinda wrote a book that inspired me beyond words. It's called Adventure Revolution, and it talks about the unexpected benefits of going on adventures in the outdoors. In her book, Belinda explains exactly why we shouldn't treat adventure as a luxury or a privilege, but make it a part of our lives. Because adventuring, taking risks, and being outdoors can bring about some amazing and proven health benefits to our mental and physical well-being.
Obviously, there are massive benefits. We have medicine, we have all these amazing things, but I think along the way we've kind of lost something, that sort of that little spark, that's something that makes life worth living.
We have completely lost touch with the wild. We've chosen comfort over nature, and that's understandable. We live longer, we are wealthier, and things are more convenient for us than they ever were before. But have we lost something in the process? American writer Richard Louv coined the phrase nature deficit disorder to describe a condition that's a direct result of our disconnect from nature. The symptoms? A diminished use of the senses, attention and focus difficulties, and higher rates of physical and emotional illnesses. Another study compared exam results taken on different days and found that on average, students did worse on days when air pollution was higher and did better on days with cleaner air. The WHO has dubbed air pollution a global health emergency, stating that over 90% of all cities exceed the acceptable levels of air pollution for healthy human development. Okay, so that is a heap load of bad news. Where do we even go from here?
nature, spending time in nature, and the very positive effects of nature on our well-being. 10 years ago, people would have been like, oh, you're just a hippie or something. Now it's mainstream. You know, people go, yeah, children, adults, everyone, people need to get outside into nature to be fulfilled, to have good mental health.
You may have come across the Japanese practice of forest bathing, or shirin-yoku as it's known in Japan. So forest bathing is all about going out into the forest and trying to connect to the nature around you. Studies have shown that forest bathing can help you dramatically improve your cardiovascular health. It can boost your immunity, it can help out with inflammation, and positively affect your emotional state and attitude, as well as reduce anxiety and depression. Shirin-yoku is considered so important that the Japanese government made an official call encouraging all of its citizens to engage in the practice. Of course, I'm not saying that we should all move into the forest right now to receive the full benefits of nature. Something as simple as rerouting your daily commute to include a walk through a park as opposed to a busy street has been proven to improve your cortisol levels and vitality by nearly 40%.
I didn't know why, but what I have experienced was over 26 years of taking people on adventures. What I could see time and time again was people healing, people finding strength that they didn't know, finding confidence they didn't know, just kind of opening whole new avenues to living differently after going through and experiencing adventure.
Numerous studies are proving over and over again that even short bursts of outdoor activity, even small-scale adventures, can be hugely beneficial to our mental health.
And it's also not a case that, you know, if you're depressed, you go into the forest and you're going to get well. Like, I really wanted to make that point really clearly, that the idea of a nature cure is problematic. And, you know, if I'd been told go for a walk in a forest and not been given like the pills that I needed, it wouldn't have been very good. It's kind of part of the whole picture. Before I found adventure and properly jumped into sort of living adventurously, I was very low in confidence. I had a lot of issues in my teenage years. It was, for me, the first thing that adventure gave me was confidence. Maybe there's another path for me. Maybe I can dream. Maybe I can do the stuff I really want to do, and actually can even think of stuff I want to do rather than just be told.
One of my favorite things about Belinda's philosophy is that it's realistic, it's accessible, because let's face it, most of us can't just like pick up all of our stuff and leave the city and build a new home out in the woods. I mean, we have responsibilities, we have jobs, we have kids, we have families, we have friends. Our lives are sometimes very much rooted in the city. But here's the good news. You don't need to move out into the forest to reap some of the benefits that nature has to offer. Spending time in nature is a birthright. It's a human right. It should be a human right. And the evidence is showing us that it's as important as eating a good diet, fruit and vegetables, having a good night's sleep. It has to be built into public health as a central thing to good human living. All right, I am back inside Odyssey, nice and cozy, and there's just a couple of thoughts that I want to leave you with before I end this video. Okay, so first of all, a couple of predictions. Number one, I really hope that with a growing body of research, scientific research, that shows that living in the city can be really bad for us, for our health, mental and physical, and that, being out in green spaces can be really good for us. I really hope that this drives governments to create more green spaces all across urban areas. I really hope that happens. And my second prediction is that we as individuals will learn about the importance of green spaces and nature for ourselves and for our children with videos like this, with books like Losing Eden and The Adventure Revolution. These are things that we can implement into our lives, and I really hope that more and more of us can have access to this kind of knowledge and also gain access to more outdoor spaces as a result. And there's just one last thing I want to say. I know that going out into the forest and forest bathing is not a cure-all. There's so much more that we do in our lives. There's so much more in the world that makes us sick. You know, the food that we eat, the chemicals we put in our bodies, the chronic stress we all experience. There's just so much, and that's all subject for a whole other video. In the meantime, I just want to leave you with one suggestion in the context of reconnecting with nature. Just go out into the wild. And it doesn't have to mean going out into the actual wilderness. Just, take your family, take your friends, and go out on a forest hike. Whenever you plan your next holiday or weekend away, just see if you can do something even more outdoorsy. See if you can connect with a local adventure club. It could be like a trail running club or hiking club or a canyoneering club. God knows there's so much all around us. Experience nature, cherish nature, get to know nature. She is going to give back in heaps and bounds. All right, you guys, if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you subscribe to the Unplugged channel right here on YouTube. And if you want more in-depth stuff, you can also subscribe to our newsletter, which is linked in the description box below, or you can follow us on Instagram as well. All right, I'm going to leave you with that, and stay wild and stay unplugged. See you in the next one.